Hi everyone, Stephen here at Teach Me Music, and today we're going to be going through the anatomy of the bass guitar. And what I mean by the anatomy is basically breaking down what all of these weird and wonderful things do when we put them all together to make what obviously everyone knows as the bass guitar. So we're going to be talking about a 4-string bass. There are others, but that's in a different video, so don't worry. This is just covering all the common things that all bass guitars have, and you should know the names of them because they're going to be important moving forward. And if you don't know what the names are or the correct terms, if you break something and you need to replace it, or if someone talks to you about it, you have no idea what they're talking about, straight over the head, no one has a clue, so this is really important to know. So we're going to start from the top and work our way down. So this is actually the top of the bass guitar. This is what we call the headstock. The headstock is basically that holds all the strings on. It's the big thing that basically just holds everything here. So this is the headstock, and the headstock features the tuning pegs, which are these 4 things here. These tuning pegs are really important because they help us tune our bass guitar. Majorly important. If you can't tune your bass guitar, what's the point in having it? Because you can't control what the notes are. You can't control the sound. Tuning the bass guitar is a really important thing, and that's covered in a different video. Just in case you're like, well, how do you tune it? I'm going to explain that in another video, so don't worry. What we also have as well, the front, this is called the machine head. So these 4 things here, these are really important as well, because the string goes straight in the middle. There is a little tiny hole that's cut in. The tip of the string goes through it, and then you curve the strings around it, and basically that's where all the strings are held in place, and they all attach to this black thing here, which is called the nut. The nut allows the strings to go nice and straight through to the headstock. If you didn't have a nut, if you played the note or the string would just vibrate, go crazy, and your sound would be absolutely terrible. You wouldn't be able to sustain anything. It would sound dire. And the nut basically just makes sure that the string nice and flush across the guitar or the bass, and that just gives you a nice consistent sound. So the nut is really important, and it's that black thing right there. If we're moving up, this massive chunk of wood right here, this is the fretboard. And the fretboard is spelled with an F, so that is F-R-E-T, just in case. And the reason why we call it the fretboard is because these silver things here, these are our frets. And a fret basically allows you to produce a sound and to produce a note. So these are really important, and we're going to cover why in another video. But just remember, fretboard is the front, and the metal strips are the frets. You can also get something that is called a fretless. Bonus points if you know what that means. It means that there are no frets. The bass guitar is fretless, hence the term. We don't have one in this video. I will show you one in another video, don't worry. So once again, fretboard and frets. The back is called the neck. So if you're talking about the actual back of the wood, the back of the bass, this is the neck of the bass guitar, and the front is the fretboard. The neck of the bass guitar is basically where you're going to put your thumb, and it's going to allow you to curve your hand around to play the notes. The neck is really important because that's where the sound is generated from. Otherwise, if you didn't have the neck, you've got no sound, you've basically got no bass guitar. Really important. The neck is actually bolted, as you can see right here. There's a few bolts. It's called a bolt-on neck if there are bolts. If not, then it's called a neck through. And a neck through basically means the neck is all the way through the body because there are no bolts. Makes sense, right? So the neck is attached to the body of the bass guitar. So the bodies can be different shape, different colors, different woods. This is the body of the bass guitar. And this is really important because it holds not only the strings, because everything is bolted and fastened to the body, it also affects the sound, it also holds the electronics, and it also holds the pickups, which I'm going to show you in a little bit more detail in a second. So the body of the bass guitar is really important, and for anyone that's got a keen eye for detail, you can get different shapes, different sizes, and different woods, and that's the reason why certain basses sound different. So if you've got one bass in your collection, I guarantee in the next couple of years you'll probably have about 200, because we all like bass guitars. That's why you're here. So obviously with the body, there is a little bit of a cutaway here, so literally a little bit of a drill hole, and that is the truss rod. So the truss rod can sometimes be found in the headstock, and sometimes can be found in the body, so right here, that little chunk of wood that's missing there. And the reason why that's important is because the truss rod is a metal rod that runs through the neck of the bass guitar. And the reason for that is because the neck of the bass guitar cannot be perfectly straight. It needs to bow or bend slightly, and that's what gives it the certain sound, allows you to play all of the frets on the fretboard. So if your neck was completely straight and had no metal rod in it, the truss rod, basically what would happen is, because of humidity and pressure and the heat and all these kind of other things, eventually that would bend or bend upwards and it would snap. So the idea is this rod is pulling everything down slightly, keeping the neck, because it's bolted on, keeping the neck secure, so it's going to stay there, it's not going to fall off, it's not going to break, unless you obviously swing the bass like an axe, as some musicians do, and you can check that out totally. So obviously if you swing it, it might break because you're going to whack it off the floor. That's nice and rock and roll. But as long as you are careful and you protect your bass, the neck is nice and secure because of the truss rod. That's the metal rod. So that's another thing to remember. Moving down, we have these two black things right here, and these are the pickups. Pickups are basically just fancy magnets. We are going to talk to you about the different magnets you can get, or different pickups. But just so you're aware, the pickups are magnets. They pick up the vibration of the string when you play a note, and they convert it into sound, which is passed through into the amplifier, and that's what you hear as a bass guitar. So without pickups, the bass guitar is pretty much redundant, especially electric bass. So you need pickups, and we'll go into more detail in that eventually, don't worry. So then, if we're moving all the way down, we've got this nice little gold bit here. This gold bit is called the bridge. The bridge can come in one solid lump of metal, and basically the strings run over it, or they can come individually like this one. So I've got an individual bridge for each string, which basically means they're a bit more adjustable, it's a bit more fancy, it's a bit more expensive, and the idea is that it's just a little bit cooler. So what is the bridge? Well, the bridge is a little bit of metal that's on the body of the bass guitar. The string goes through it, and there is like a nice little slit and a nice little cut here in the metal, and that is called the saddle. The string runs over the saddle, and that's what keeps the string straight. So when you play a note, which obviously we will do very, very soon, the idea is from the nut to the saddle and the bridge, that's where your sound is generated. If you go past the nut, no sound is generated because it stops the vibration. And pretty much if you go off the bridge, well, that's the end of the bass guitar, there's no sound. So from there to there is where your sound is generated when you play a note. So nut, just to recap, that's the nut, and this is the bridge and the saddle is the bit that the string goes over. You might have a different bass to me, so check yours out. You will see a little bit of a cut in the metal, and the string needs to run perfectly straight down that. Otherwise, it's going to sound terrible. The string is going to wobble, go crazy, and it's not going to sound good. So remember all those little details. It's going to be important when we carry on. So what else do we have? Well, we have the electronics, which are all these weird dials down here. I do have some switches as well. They're still called electronics, and electronics are basically how they affect the electronics and the electrical circuit in the bass guitar. So all of these dials do something, and they're soldered in, and it doesn't matter what bass guitar you have, it's the same. So you might have a few less dials, you might have more. It might look like a spaceship where you've got 1,000,000 dials on it. They all do certain things, and we're not going to go into detail in this video about it, but this is called the electronics of the bass guitar, just so you're aware of that. We've got a few minor things to talk about, and then you've completed the anatomy of the bass guitar. You are now a master of the anatomy. Always good to know. So we do have this little pin here, and we do also have one at the bottom there, so right at the bottom of the bass. These are called strap buttons, strap pins, strap locks, literally strap, insert word, and the idea is that that is where the strap goes through. So I call them strap buttons or strap pins. There are quite a few different names for them, but the strap just goes over it, and then obviously the bass is not going to fall off my shoulder, it's not going to hit the floor, I'm not going to cry live on camera, because no one wants to watch that, hopefully. Be kind. So the idea is the strap is held in place by this pin right here, and obviously this one. So there's one final thing we need to do, and that is to talk about this weird thing right here. So this little cut right here, this little hole in the bass guitar, is what we call the input jack, and also it can be on the side sometimes. Doesn't matter where it is, the idea is that you take your jack lead, which is this black lead right here, and you plug the other end into your amplifier, and that's where the sound of the bass guitar is generated. So it's an input jack going to your amplifier, and it's just a really small connection, and you just plug the jack lead in, and that's what this thing is right here. So if I play a note, you'll hear it because it's plugged in. If I pull this out, which I'm not gonna, but if I did, then there is zero sound coming out of this bass guitar because the circuit inside the instrument is not complete. When you plug this in, it completes the circuit, and you don't need a degree in electronics to understand when you complete a circuit, something happens. If the circuit is broken or not complete, nothing happens. Really, really simple. So that is the anatomy of the bass guitar. Every bass guitar ever made will have all of those components, and it doesn't matter if they're a bit more fancy or a different color or a different shape, they're still doing the exact same job, and you now know all those terms. You now can be a little bit more cooler when you're talking about your bass guitar by going, I'm going to change the tuning pegs to a different color because gold is not my color. Let's change them to black. Let's change them to chrome. Let's do this, let's do that, let's change the nut. You can now use this information with other musicians. You sound cooler, more intellectual, and more intelligent, and that's obviously why you're watching this video, because now you know the anatomy of the bass guitar. So if you need to watch any of that again and to cover any of those points, obviously please do. They are important things to remember, and then when you're ready, we'll see you in the next video.